Hello, everyone. So we're going to get started with the migration and immigration panel. Our first presenter will be Guy Butler Felton, who is currently a junior at UNC Chapel Hill. He's double majoring in history and global studies with a focus on the Middle East and a minor in medieval and early modern studies. His presentation will be on offshoring and whether or not it is the future of migration. So I will turn it over to Guy right now and can continue with his presentation.
Okay. Briefly, before we start, this presentation is not a political argument for or against offshoring, but instead try and understand the reasons and motivations behind offshoring, why it's important to talk about offshoring for Europe's migration future. Okay. So what is offshoring? Offshoring is the concept of relocating asylum seekers to another country rather than having to give them refuge inside your own country while processing their asylum claim. This is normally practiced in two ways: either relocation, where migrants are processed and accepted by a different country, or detention, where migrants are held in a third country while their asylum claim is processed, and then will return to the host country if their asylum claim is successful. This topic, often people misuse terms, and so it's kind of good to have some clarity around some terms before we start. However, there is a decent amount of overlap sometimes, so I'll endeavor to use the correct terms all the time, but if I don't, please let me know. So first, migrant. It's a very broad term, just referring to people living outside their country of origin. This can include asylum seekers, but can also include myself to show how broad that term is. And then you have asylum seekers, person who has fled their country of origin due to persecution and are looking for protection in a new country. They will not yet be recognized as a refugee. However, the right to seek asylum is protected under the UN Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. And then a refugee, an individual entitled to protection from persecution by international law prior to their entry into the country of destination. This is done through resettlement. So countries have the option of like how many refugees they'll resettle inside their own country. The criteria for being assessed as a refugee is owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, member of a particular social group, or political opinion. So, the history of offshoring. The history of offshoring is longer and much more diverse than one might think. There are many historical examples, such as Guantanamo Bay, which is an offshore prison used to hold people outside the US sovereign borders. However, the policy of exiling or using prisons to keep people outside sovereign bounds is from antiquity, shown by Al-Shabadis. Even the recent policy of detention across the southern US border can be seen as offshoring. However, the most applicable and relevant history of offshoring was in 2001 by the Australian government. The proposed policy was to stop asylum seekers reaching Australian waters by boat without a valid visa. This was called the Pacific Solution. The policy was implemented in 2001 until it was dismantled in 2008 and then restarted again in 2012. They used Nauru and Papua New Guinea, which you can see on the top of the map. Please don't be fooled. It's really not that close to Australia. It looks so on the map, but the scale is well off. And the main goal of the policy was to deter boats and people from entering Australian waters. Public opinion to this was rather strong, and there were many protests in Australia against the policy. But as you can see from the graph, that boat numbers reaching Australian waters did drop after the implementation in 2001, and when it was dismantled in 2008, boat numbers started to rise again. So, offshoring on the rise. Offshoring is particularly relevant currently in Europe. Recently, United Kingdom in 2022 announced a plan to offshore asylum seekers without a visa and that they deem illegal to Rwanda. Then following suit, Italy announced an offshoring agreement with Albania. There is reported interest from a few other countries in Europe, most notably Denmark. However, it is not just offshoring that is on the rise. Tighter restrictions and pushes for more regulations on migrants is happening all across Europe, as demonstrated by Viktor Orban in Hungary, and the EU's policies of externalizing borders beyond their sovereign bounds, such as in Libya and Tunisia. So why is offshoring on the rise? Europe has been trying to deal with migrant influx since the last large migration to Europe in 2015 during the Syrian civil war. Over the last decade, this has caused frustration and in many cases hatred towards migrants in Europe. This can be seen in these two graphs. So you've seen in 2023 the largest increase in asylum seeker applications to nearly 1 million in Europe, and that's a 52% rise from 2022. And also the largest increase in irregular border crossings, approximately 400,000 in 2023, and that's a 17% increase from 2022. So as you can see, the two coupled together have increased frustration in populaces in Europe. In response to these trends and the frustrations, governments have tried tighter border controls. Offshoring is a policy which aligns with this current feeling in Europe. So offshoring is seen as a solution to these high migrant flows and asylum seekers for three reasons. The first being deterrent. Offshoring policy's main goal is to deter people from trying to come to the country, mainly by stopping boats or irregular crossings, whether that's in a lorry as well. So here you can see Rishi Sunak with his famous slogan, "Stop the boats." Oh, sorry, Rishi Sunak's the UK Prime Minister. There's also a secondary argument used by a lot of these countries, which is it will reduce human smuggling, which will make safer routes for migrants because there'll be less dangerous trips due to human smugglers. The second reason is the streamlined migration. As a deterrent will hopefully reduce numbers, therefore you'll be able to reduce asylum seeker backlog, which has been increasing in Europe, with wait times of over 2 years in many cases. So here you can see that 2022, you've had the most people waiting for asylum since 2016, 2017 in Europe. And just in the UK alone, at the end of 2022, there was a backlog of 132,182 claims waiting initial decisions. Again, you can see this. So if you can stop the number of people coming, then you can process more claims more quickly and have less people waiting on initial decisions. Following point from this is that you will save money. Processing claims takes a long time, and during that time, under international law, you have to house asylum seekers. This costs a lot of money. As you can see, the UK spent 29% of its total aid budget, which totals to nearly $4.5 billion US, and Germany spent nearly 13% of its entire aid budget on housing refugees. You can also see the 40 hotels that the UK rents out completely to house asylum seeker claimants while they're being processed. So if you can reduce the backlog, you'll then have to house people for less amount of time, therefore saving money. There are two current proposals for offshoring. Firstly, the UK-Rwanda Economic Agreement, and secondly, the Italy-Albania Agreement. The UK-Rwanda Economic Agreement occurred in April 2022. And it's a deal where people who have entered the UK through irregular routes and have no legal authorization, and which the government have deemed to be illegal, will be relocated to Rwanda to have their asylum claim processed by the Rwandan government. If they are found to have legitimate asylum claim in Rwanda, they'll be granted legal status there and will not be relocated to England. Instead, they'll be settled and given work in Rwanda. The UK so far has paid 240 million for this plan. It's hard to find exact costs, but the breakdown is 120 million for economic development for Rwanda more broadly, 20 million for initial costs of housing and processing claims, and the second payment was made in April 2023 of 100 million to continue this policy. However, the UK Supreme Court ruled this policy to be unlawful in 2023, as Rwanda's asylum system didn't align with international law, and currently no one has yet been sent to Rwanda under this policy. The Italy-Albania Agreement was announced in November 2023, and in February 2024, the Albanian government has ratified this agreement. The Italian government claims that they want to start sending people through this process in the spring of this year. So hopefully for them in the next upcoming months. The agreement is for Italy to set up 2 migrant detention centres in Albania. When people trying to enter Italy by boat are stopped at sea, they'll be sent to a screening centre in Albania. After initial screenings, migrants will be sent to a second centre while their claim is processed. If the claim is successful, the migrants will be sent to Italy and receive legal status there. If they are unsuccessful, then Italy is also responsible for those claimants too. The most likely possibility for these claimants will they'll be repatriated, which means they'll be sent back to their country of origin. It is estimated that this policy will cost 600 million over 5 years. So, is offshoring inevitable? As there are 2 current full-fledged agreements and plans waiting to happen contingent on legal challenges, and 1 offshoring plan already occurring, as well as increased and growing fear of migrants in Europe, is offshoring the future that we are heading towards? Is this future inevitable? Undoubtedly, many countries will be looking towards the UK and Rwanda to see if the agreement gets off the ground and starts to operate. If this is the case, I think it is likely that other countries will follow suit. Austria and Denmark have openly considered the possibility of offshoring, and Denmark even proposed the agreement with Rwanda in 2021, as you can see by the photo at the top. In fact, Denmark was the original idea behind the Rwanda agreement. There is clearly a huge amount of will in European countries to try and find a more global solution to the so-called global migrant crisis, and offshoring is the current front runner as that global solution. This is the direction which is occurring, and therefore, as global citizens, I feel we have 2 options. Either we acknowledge and understand the importance of offshoring, the policies, as well as the dangers, or 2, we fight offshoring as unjust and find other solutions instead. So the importance about talking about offshoring. The element that both those options have in common is that it necessitates that we talk about offshoring. We can't just ignore the fact that the approaches to refugees, migrants, and asylum are changing from the established post-World War II era. It is important that there is an open discourse to guide this change. Offshoring is loaded with problems, from violations of international law to human rights abuses. And if we don't start to talk about offshoring as a reality and instead dismiss it as a dangerous reality or a vile policy, we fail to recognize potential problems and find potential solutions to those problems where we can make offshoring safer and more humane for migrants. However, secondly, if after considering the policy of offshoring thoroughly, we decide that offshoring is not a reality we can accept, then we need an open discourse to resist offshoring, turn the tide against this growing sentiment, and instead find better solutions that might handle these excessive migrant flows. So, current problems with offshoring. There are 2 main problems that were seen by the Australia example. Firstly, human rights abuses. Human rights abuses are the most prominent issue surrounding offshoring programs. News media and journalism frequently criticise Australia's program with Papua New Guinea for arbitrary detention, lack of proper healthcare, and removal of personal liberties. For example, Al Jazeera released an expose piece that followed 2 15-year-old boys, Mehmed and Adnan. The boys spent 9 months imprisoned at Christmas Island detention facility, in contrast to the official waiting period of 2 months. They were later granted asylum, but not before they were subject to detention within plastic fences that look something like this, but are actually much more severe, that were prone to mold, vermin, and flooding. According to a study conducted in 2016 by UNHCR medical officials, they found that 80% of the surveyed population suffered from depression, anxiety, or PTSD. While the refugee experience itself is stressful and psychologically taxing, Professor Petrie argues that the lack of medical support within offshoring facilities poses unique challenges on mental and physical health. Offshoring policies must improve their human rights record if they want to be a workable policy in the future. Second issue with offshoring. Another major concern surrounding offshoring policy is accountability. This is particularly problematic in respect to rejections. Offshoring asylum seekers does not solve the problem of assessing asylum claims, but instead reallocates this burden. As it has not eradicated this challenge, there is still the problem of what to do with asylum seekers who have been rejected. This is a particularly tough issue due to the principle of non-refoulement, which is defined as No contracting state shall expel or return any refugee in any manner. This is a huge tenet of international law. Therefore, rejected asylum seekers often can't be returned home to their home country. A policy that violates non-refoulement is a clear violation of international law and would never be feasible. This was particularly a problem with the UK plan in Rwanda. Rwandan officials said the issue of rejected claims was the UK's government responsibility, but the UK government was yet to release what would happen to rejected claimants. The policy is the reason the Supreme Court ruled the plan to be illegal, as they could not be certain that no one would be refoulement under Rwandan asylum systems. So, avenues for offshoring. The best way to make offshoring more feasible in regard to human rights and international law is offshoring of detention over reallocation, because detention has more accountability if it, as accepted claimants then get returned to the original country rather than being relocated to another country and being under another jurisdiction completely. It's important to have a deal where rejected applicants have clear channels and protocol that do not involve refoulement. This involves applications in detention center, applying to multiple resettlement programs in many countries, and having agreements with the third country that no migrant will be refouled until like the proper legal channels have been fulfilled. To try and make detention centers more humane, there needs to be more money to ensure conditions of the center are clean, medical care is provided, and this needs to be regulated by a separate body, potentially UNHCR or WHO. And then to stop arbitrary detentions, there must be much greater transparency around the wait times. Numbers at detention centers must be limited to a capacity at which each center can fulfill asylum claims quickly. It is clear that much must change for future offshoring policies. I'm unable to discuss further elements in the time period, so I left a few further discussions, but also welcome questions, such as how will climate migration affect global migration and potentially offshoring, and then also what are our other options outside of offshoring. Thank you.